Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we are going to be talking about The Green Knight, which I did get to see probably last Thursday, and I didn't do my review after I saw the movie. I kind of wanted to sit on the movie and let it stir because I honestly didn't know what my thoughts were on this film after first initially watching it. And I decided to just not do my review and do it, before I had my thoughts settled for it. So now here I am. I have my thoughts settled. I've watched some videos. I watched some interviews from the directors, and I have quite an interesting take on this film. So if you guys don't know what The Green Knight is, it is based on the Arthurian poem that essentially follows the character Gawain, who is the nephew of King Arthur, who, pulled out the sword and the stone, did all the magical stuff that you've heard of in all the King Arthur legends of the past. And this one is a spin-on after the fact, after he's already King Arthur, and after all that's established, his nephew essentially challenges this Green Knight, who challenges him to take a strike at him, and in a year's time, the Green Knight will take that strike back in return to Gawain. So this movie is essentially a year after that initial challenge by the Green Knight. Gawain goes on his quest to find the Green Knight, to return the axe, and to basically take back the strike that he had given to the Green Knight a years prior. So what were my thoughts on this movie after initially watching it? I was very, very, very blown away by the visuals of this movie. This is one of the most visually beautiful movies I've seen all year, from that standpoint, from a cinematography standpoint, from a visual effects standpoint as well, with how low budget this movie was and with how grand and fantastical this movie was with the tone and with the fantasy elements. It was a striking movie to watch. And I always say this whenever I make my videos, I always put some images from the movies, throughout the video. And on the movies that have the best cinematography, it's so easy to find just beautiful screenshots to showcase during my videos. And every single frame of this movie could be a gorgeous screenshot that I can put up on this video. The cinematography and the direction in those regards are so mind-blowingly amazing. I love David Lowery as a director, and I think this is definitely his most mature film that he's done up until this point. I love A Ghost Story. That's one of my favorite A24 movies, period. I absolutely love that film. I watched it, I rented it, and I ended up buying it right after I rented the movie because I loved it that much. I also do really, really enjoy Pete's Dragon, and apparently David Lowery is working on a Peter Pan and Wendy movie for Disney, which I am now extremely excited about, especially with hearing him talk about that movie and saying that's his favorite thing that he's ever made thus far in his career. And I am just a huge fan of David Lowery, and I think his direction and his style and his effort that he put into this movie while also being deadly ill during the making of this film, it's such an inspiring tale of just how he made this thing and how beautiful it ended up being, and the editing, because he edited this movie over the pandemic, and all these different things that makes this movie so special to not only him, but for him to be able to put out to other people like myself. So from a filmmaking standpoint, I thought this movie was incredibly well done. And so what did I think of the story? As soon as I walked out of the theater, I honestly was not quite sure what I thought of it. I had some theories and some ideas, which I'll get into in a second here in full spoilery fashion, so I will be talking about spoilers from this point on in the video. But there are so many things about the story that I just didn't quite understand on first viewing, and some ideas that I had, some ideas that I believe actually ended up being correct. And so when you first initially walk out of this movie, I completely understand if you walk out of it not really liking it, like I did. But then the movie sits with you, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I thought about the themes and the ideas that it presented throughout Gawain's quest throughout this movie, and I started to love this movie's story throughout the few days after the fact of me watching it. So the main thematic elements of this movie are the 5 virtues of a knight, which are friendship, generosity, chastity, courtesy, and piety. And so throughout Gawain's entire quest, throughout this entire movie, he essentially fails every single virtue that a knight needs to become a knight, or for the honorable king that he wants, that he so desires to be. He needs these 5 things in order to be successful in those regards. And so once you get to the end of the movie and the last 15 minutes happens and you see his life flash before his eyes, or I guess the future of his life flash before his eyes, and the failures that he will have as a king, that, after understanding the 5 virtues of a knight, is so much more impactful, especially when, as I was watching the movie, I was like, okay, this is his first task, this is his first quest. He failed immediately, and then he continues to fail along the line. So the first virtue that he fails at is piety. And essentially what piety is, it's, the the honor and the respect that you give to his faith and to his king and all these different aspects. At the beginning of the movie, he wakes up essentially in the slums of this kingdom, and he's sleeping with this one woman who is played by Alicia Vikander, who also plays another character later on in this movie that has to do with Chastity later on in the video. And so he has this relationship with her that he's not very committed to, as you'll see, and he's drinking a lot, and he shows up late to the Christmas celebrations, and his mother is concerned about where he was and what he does with his time, and all these different things all point towards his failure of piety. But most importantly, the biggest failure he has in terms of piety is when the Green Knight barges into the Knights Round Table of King Arthur, and he poses the game of the Green Knight, which is somebody needs to stand up and strike a blow at the Green Knight, and a year has to pass for the Green Knight to be able to return that blow to whoever struck him in the first place. And so Gawain, heroically, as you're led to believe, steps up and challenges the Green Knight for this thing. And I think that was his biggest mistake in terms of piety, because he wasn't doing this for the sake of King Arthur, because King Arthur was not up to the challenge at this point in his life. And it wasn't for the honor of it either. He was doing it for selfish reasons, because the king asked him earlier in the scene about, what is your story? What is your tale? What have you done in your life that is worth telling? And he doesn't have an answer for it yet. His second failure lies within his beginning of the quest. He marches off on his horse, and he encounters the one kid who's in so many different A24 projects, played by Barry Keoghan. And as soon as I saw his character, I was like, this guy, I don't trust him for a second. He's essentially walking through this entire battlefield full of dead soldiers, and Barry Keoghan's character is essentially asking him for really any sort of generosity, which this is his second set of failures, because for one, he's marching over this array of dead bodies that has been pillaged by the kingdom, and he has absolutely no empathy for this whatsoever, for this kid who says that he lost I think it was his brother, I believe, in the battle. And he offers directions for Gawain in order to find the Green Chapel, to find the Green Knight, and Gawain does nothing in return to Barry Keoghan's character. Barry Keoghan has to essentially beg for some sort of payment, and even when Gawain does give him payment, it's a single coin, and this leads to him and a few other scavengers essentially tying him up, taking away all his belongings, all his treasures, and running off with them, and leaving Gawain tied to a tree, which then there's an amazing shot where it rotates around, Gawain is tied to the tree, and then it rotates back to him, and he is now a skeleton lying on the ground, and then it rotates again, and then he's back to being alive. And so I think there's a lot of interpretations in terms of what this could mean for the rest of the film up until this point, because you could believe that he does die in this moment, and the rest of the movie is fantasy, the rest of the movie is in his head, or the rest of the movie is his desires. But I don't think that's the case. I like the idea of it, but I really think it's him imagining his loss at this point, and him not wanting that to be his ending, and for that to be the motivation of him to be able to get out of that situation. The next section of this movie was actually my favorite of the entire movie. This is the encounter with the ghost, played by Erin Kellyman, and I love her as an actress. She always pops up in very small roles in different things. I wish she had more to do in The Falcon and Winter Soldier as the main villain of that series, and also in Solo Star Wars Story. I hope they give her a lot more roles, and I thought she was wonderful as this ghost who he finds this hut after he has lost all his things. He goes in there and he sleeps on the bed, and for one, that is kind of against courtesy to just kind of break into somebody's house and just sleep in their bed, but he was desperate, so there's some sort of forgiveness that you can give for him in that way. But the ghost of this character essentially asks him to retrieve her skull, and in response to that, Gawain asks what will he get in return for doing this for her. And that right there, as soon as he said that, I'm like, you just failed your task here, you just failed your mission. Even when I was first watching for the first time, I was like, yes, he definitely failed this one. When he first struck the blow towards the Green Knight, chopping his head off, I was like, if you just give him a light little blow, then when you return in a year, he's not going to try to cut your head off. So that was, again, another set of failures from this character. And so he dives in, he retrieves the skull for her, but he did fail the task and not being courteous in order to just do this out of the own kindness of his own heart. Instead, he wanted something out of it. Also along for the journey throughout this movie is this little fox, which I will say the blending of CGI and the practical effects in this movie worked pretty well, and I think the fox for the most part looks really good, especially because you see the fox a lot in like very wide shots, these gorgeous, beautiful, panning shots of the forest, all practical effects, and then you have a very small fox running around, kind of hidden hidden in shadows. Even when you get to the giants, they're all kind of faded because they're so far off into the distance, and I thought they looked pretty good as well. So I think David Lowery did a good job with balancing the VFX with his practical, beautiful cinematography that he had in this movie with the low budget that he had. And so this fox was kind of long for the journey with Gawain, and at first Gawain was throwing rocks at this fox and telling the fox to essentially, screw off, to go away, to shoo. And when he's finally in this cave and the fox is there, he throws a rock at it, and finally he kind of succumbs to the fox's eyes, essentially just begging to be able to come into the cave, and then he's able to befriend the fox after that point. But that in lies the breaking of the fourth virtue that I'm going to talk about in this video, which is friendship. At first, he wasn't, accepting of this fox. He wanted nothing to do with this thing. And by the end of the film, with the last time that you see the fox, after the fox kind of warns him not to go to the Green Chapel with, the things that he has gotten up until that point in this movie, he had not earned it at that point. So the fox warned him about it, and he decided to ignore the advice of a friend and to go there anyways. And that was, again, breaking that virtue of friendship. And finally, Chastity, which provided one of the most uncomfortable scenes in this movie, and you guys definitely know what I'm talking about with Alicia Vikander's character. And I love Alicia Vikander. She has a great monologue talking about what green means in this movie, because green also has a very thematic element in this film, whether it means life or death or all these different ideas. And this was a wonderful speech, but throughout this entire sequence, he is continually failing to be loyal to that one peasant girl that he basically had a relationship back in the kingdom. And so when he succumbs to the seduction of this woman, the lady of this manor, essentially, he again fails another virtue in chastity. And so after miserably failing the entire quest, his journey to find the Green Knight, he gets to the Green Chapel. He places the axe on the steps in front of the feet of the Green Knight, and he stays there for quite some time awaiting the awakening of the Green Knight, which I think that shows some sort of commitment to what this journey has been for him. He didn't run away initially. He got there. He got to that point. There are so many moments throughout this entire movie where he could have given up, but he didn't. So at least he had some sort of persistence with him. But in terms of the 5 virtues, he failed miserably. And when the Green Knight is about to strike him with the axe to return the blow that he had promised him a year prior on Christmas Day, he flinches, he hesitates, and he ends up running off. And that's where he gets the entire flashing of his life in the future, of him returning back to the kingdom and him being a terrible king and starting wars and his kingdom essentially burning down. One of the worst things that he does in this sequence is he takes the child that he has with Alicia Vikander's peasant character and essentially leaves her because she isn't royal enough to be worthy of being his queen. And so he ditches her for somebody else, for somebody of royalty, which was super, super messed up. And it was a heartbreaking scene to see Alicia Vikander's character crawling on the floor, reaching for her child that's being torn away from her, and all these terrible things, all these ideas that he had failed, the friendship, the chastity, which is in line with this as well, and all the virtues that you have reached up until this point, all those failures being presented in terms of what would happen if he were to become king. I think I'll take it back. This was my favorite sequence in the entire movie. This whole thing, which was essentially had no dialogue in it, had the amazing musical score in this movie, and that tone and that direction, the editing that David Lowery had throughout this entire movie, and all of it, you basically reach the peak climax of this film within that, fantasy of what he would be if he were to be given the knighthood and if he were to be given the throne and all those sort of things. And it all snaps back to the Green Chapel by the end of this sequence, and Gawain takes off this green sash that he got from, at first I believe his mother gave him a green sash, and then he lost it from, that one kid who stole all his things, and then the lady of the manor also gives him that green sash that essentially protects him from having a strike taken against him, and basically makes him so he won't die at the hands of any sort of strike or blow. And so this is supposed to protect him, and I think there is a theme of a mother's trust in her son and letting him go, and a son being able to let go of the protection of a mother, because I think there's a lot of thematic elements, because the mother is the one who summoned the Green Knight in the first place. And I think that the majority, when it comes to my opinion on the actual themes of this movie, yes, I think he failed on all those journeys, but there's a lot of different plot holes and conveniences throughout the quest where, his axe was stolen and all of a sudden it reappears in that house during the sequence with Erin Kellyman's character, and all these different things happen with conveniences again, the green sash reappears after being stolen earlier in the movie, and now all of a sudden Alicia Vikander's character is giving that green sash to Gawain. And even the fact that, that actress is playing two different roles, two very different roles in this movie, and it all has to do with the chastity elements of the virtues, it makes it seem like this entire story is not only given from an unreliable narrator from Gawain's perspective, but is also a fantastical and more thematic quest rather than an actual physical quest. So that's what I think all of this represents. I'm not even sure if the fox was truly speaking, or if that was his inner subconscious, or if the giants were real in this world, or if all these different mystical, like the ghost thing, if that was even real, or if it was all in his head. I'm not quite sure about that, but I do think that this quest was more of a mental quest rather than a literal quest that he went on. And so by the time he got to the Green Knights, and by the time he imagined his future, and by the time the Green Knights finally had the axe above his head, and he had the courage and the courtesy and all the different things, all the different virtues that he realized that he failed, and what his failings would eventually do to him, he has that courage to take off that sash and to accept his fate. And the movie ends with one line from the Green Knights being, "Off with your head," and then it cuts to black, David Lowery being the director, and I was just speechless at the end of the movie. I really had no idea what to think, but after stirring on this movie over the weekend and just thinking about it and just really learning to love this movie, I really desperately want to see this movie again. I think it is one of the best of the year so far, and it took me a second to realize all the things that I had missed on first viewing. So I bet on second viewing and third viewing and all subsequent viewings of this movie, I think David Lowery has done his most mature film to date. I think I still love A Ghost Story more. Like I said, it's one of my favorite A24 movies, period, alongside Hereditary and other movies like that. And so The Green Knight, I'm so glad I have this incredible poster for it. I'm so glad that I had a chance to see this movie in theaters, and it should still be in theaters for a little more time. So if you guys have not seen The Green Knight, even with all the spoilers that I have given in this video, it is definitely worth watching just for the visuals alone on the big screen. So that was a bit of a long journey talking about The Green Knight and the whole mystical fantasy elements. This is one of my favorite fantasy movies that's come out in a very long time. So what did you guys think of The Green Knight? Comment down below your own theories and speculations. I know I didn't cover Joel Edgerton's character and his entire storyline within, that lord of the, he was like the lord and she was the lady of that manor that he went into at that point. And I didn't really talk about that because I don't really know what it means. I need to rewatch the movie and see if it fits into any of the virtues. I'm sure that it does, because he doesn't return anything to the Lord by the end of that section of the movie. So I believe that is yet another failing of his. I'm just not sure which category it fits into. So thank you guys for watching my video on The Green Knight. What did you guys think about it? And I hope to see you all in my next review.